Chapter 2. The next morning we had our breakfast at the lodge, then went directly to the upper room of the temple. There was no visible concept of the confines of a room, nor any evidence of limitation, and so, we moved freely with no thought of exertion. When we were ready to go below to the room of the records, we were there. As we had accomplished this without the presence of our friends, we realized the reason for their withdrawal and were very much elated over our attainment. The 1st of April was fast approaching. We had finished the records in the temple rooms and had taken up the work of making measured drawings of the numerous characters and many carvings cut in the rocks outside. This work was going along very nicely because of our all-absorbing interest. One afternoon a messenger came to the village. We met our hostess and were informed that the messenger had brought the information that a party of bandits was at large in the valley below. This caused considerable uneasiness among the inhabitants, as this village had been the focal point of attempted raids for many years. The report had gone far and wide that the Tau Cross Temple was the hiding place for vast treasure. The many attempts to rob the village had failed. The bands had in a great measure attributed former failures to the resistance of the people who lived in the valley below. A number of the bands had now concentrated their combined forces, and a band of about 4,000 well-mounted and armed men were preying upon and devastating the valley, in order to discourage the resistance of the inhabitants in closer proximity to the little village of the Tau Cross. They hoped by this method that the raid would be more successful. The messenger also appealed for protection for the remaining inhabitants, as a great many had already been destroyed and they had reached the limit of their resistance. He was told that there was no one in the village who could be sent, but our hostess assured him that he could return to his home and that no harm would come to his people. We went on with our work, noting the uneasiness of the villagers, and that uneasiness was communicated to us. The next morning we again resumed our work as we were very anxious to complete the references for our records. We were certain they would give a complete and accurate history and also, references as to where other records could be found. Thus we could trace the history of this older and extremely enlightened civilization that occupied this vast and now most remote portion of the world. We were disturbed by the possibility of losing this collection by reason of the bandit raids. As the results of our work, this collection was all assembled in the rooms of the records, where they had hitherto withstood a number of similar raids from the same source. That evening we talked to our hostess about the possibility of the formulation of some plan to aid the villagers and voiced our surprise and wonder at the absence of our friends. We were told that, as an appeal for aid had been made by the messenger, the bandits would be obliged to stop their raids or they would destroy themselves. We retired that evening fully assured that we had been over-solicitous of our own safety. We arose early and were preparing to resume work, when the same messenger appeared with the news that the raids had ceased upon the inhabitants and that the band had concentrated their entire force about 20 miles down the valley for an apparent concerted last drive on our little village. As our hostess and little party stood talking to the messenger, who was surrounded by a group of the villagers, a horseman rode into the village and came toward us. In coming toward us, as he passed smaller groups of congregated people, he was apparently recognized. They immediately dispersed and fled in terror. As he neared our group, the messenger called out the horseman's name and then, the messenger as well as the others took refuge in flight, evidently fearing that the horseman was being followed by the band. Our hostess and ourselves were the only ones left as we awaited the nearer approach of the horseman. He reined in his horse and with much gusto addressing our chief, began to speak, saying that the bandits were fully aware we were strangers and that they were acquainted with our mission. He spoke in a tongue that none of us understood. He saw our bewilderment and asked if there were not someone that could interpret. Our hostess turned and faced the man as he sat upon his horse and asked if she could be of service. At first he looked as though he had received a severe electric shock. He, however, sufficiently recovered his composure to fairly spring from his horse. He rushed toward her with outstretched hand, exclaiming, "You here," in the language that we understood. Then he placed his hands to his forehead and prostrated himself before her, begging her pardon. Our hostess directed him to arise and deliver his message. We could see her form stiffen and, for a moment, her features almost blazed with anger. So intense was her display of emotion that, for an instant, we, as well as the man himself, were absolutely startled out of our composure. The words, "Coward, murderer, step forth and deliver your message," almost leapt from her lips. The man again went to his knees. Again the words blazed forth, "Stand up. Are you so debased that you dare not stand?" We did not wonder at the man's abject terror, for we, as well as he, were absolutely rooted to the spot, unable to move. I am certain had it been humanly possible for the man to have done so, he would have fled from the scene. For the moment he, as well as ourselves, had lost all power of speech and action. He crumpled to the ground, limp and apparently lifeless, his eyes staring and his mouth agape. This was the first and only time in our experience with these people of superior powers that we had seen one of them give expression in any way to violent emotion. We were as terrified as the bandit. The vibrations hit us just as distinctly as the force of a tremendous explosion, accompanied by an electric shock that not only paralyzed speech but our muscles as well. That is the only way I can describe the sensation. Coming from that slight and unassuming fragile form, do you wonder that these vibrations paralyzed us into inaction? Although this situation lasted only a moment, it seemed hours before the tension relaxed. We were as transfixed as statues, yet there flooded over us in that instant a great pity for the bandit, and we found ourselves longing to go to his assistance. This was the reaction of all, yet we only stood and stared at our hostess. Almost at once the condition changed. At first a startled look came over her face, then it changed to the same kindly expression that we were accustomed to, and there swept over us such a wave of compassion that we rushed to the prostrate form on the ground. Our hostess was bending over him, her hand clasping his. Again we were mystified and could only say, "Will wonders never cease?" The man soon regained consciousness, was helped to his feet, and was made as comfortable as possible on a bench nearby. He absolutely refused to enter any of the houses. Our hostess then apologized for the vehemence which she had expressed, noting the effect it had upon us. Our flesh was quivering and it required some time for us to regain our composure. She explained that this man was the leader of one of the most notorious bands that infested that portion of the Gobi. His name, if mentioned at all, was spoken with awe, as he was the most fearless and ruthless of characters. His familiar title literally translated meant, "Consummate Black Devil released from hell." His features portrayed, en masque, were kept in many villages and worn by those participating in the ritual of driving the evil spirit from the village and its inhabitants. Our hostess had contacted this man on 2 former occasions when attempted raids had failed, and each time he had evidenced the deepest hatred for her and our friends in general, going out of his way to harass them and sending violent messages from time to time, which they ignored completely. His sudden appearance alone had brought the past indignities so forcibly before her that she, for the time being, had lost control of her emotions. Having fully regained her composure, she walked over to the man. At her approach, he made a futile attempt to arise, but was only able to draw himself together and sit more erect, the picture of abject fear. Hatred was delineated in every movement of his body, which was trembling as though stricken with palsy. Our hostess, now cool and collected, with no trace of fear or emotion, her face, features, and body as wonderfully cut as the most delicate cameo, presented an amazing contrast. We wanted to remove the man at once, and, although this thought was not expressed, our hostess raised her hand commanding silence. Our chief realized that she was in charge of the situation and that anything we would attempt to do would only place us in a ludicrous position. We withdrew out of hearing while our hostess talked in low and quiet tones for quite some time before the man answered a word. As he spoke, the lady motioned us to approach. We sat on the ground before them, glad to make any move that would relieve the tension of suspense. The bandit explained that he had prevailed upon his superior leaders to allow him to come as a peace emissary to treat with the people for the surrender of the supposed treasure that was concealed in the Tau Cross Temple. If the inhabitants would surrender the treasure, the bandits would agree not to molest them further, would agree to release all their prisoners, of which they claimed there were over 3,000, and would immediately leave the country and never again molest the inhabitants of the valley. Our hostess told him there was no treasure that would be of any value to them. A thorough explanation of the fact was gone into, with an offer to conduct him through all the rooms of the temple or any place he wished to go. He flatly refused this proposition, saying that he feared they would hold him as hostage, and no assurance upon our part could break down this fear. Our hostess reassured him of our sincerity, and he suddenly became convinced that we were honest in our statements. Then a situation difficult and alarming for him arose. He told us that he was the instigator of this plot and had fired the imaginations of the other bandits with the zeal for possessing the treasure, and that he had painted a lurid picture of the fabulous wealth that would be theirs should he succeed. In fact, he and his father had held their band together with promises of the possession of this treasure. He was the chief of the band that had consolidated with 5 other bands to carry out this raid. The crux of this situation was that if he should return to his band with the information that there was no treasure, he would immediately be branded as a traitor and, as such, would be dealt with accordingly. He could not deter the band from the contemplated attack, as they would not believe him on account of his zeal in pressing the situation up to this point. It was decidedly an embarrassing position for him. To our great surprise, our hostess offered to accompany him to the camp. Our protests were quietly overruled and she prepared to leave immediately. She assured us that she was in no danger, but that if we went along, our presence would instill suspicion in the minds of the bandits, so that all would incur great danger. We meekly submitted. There was nothing else we could do. The man mounted his horse and we assisted her to mount to the seat that was prepared behind him. As they rode from the village, they presented a never-to-be-forgotten picture, one that will live in our memories for all eternity, the bandit with doubt written all over his features and our hostess smiling back at us with the warm assurance that she would return by nightfall. We lost all interest in our work for the rest of the day and wandered aimlessly about the village until sunset. We returned to the lodge to await the return of our hostess and, upon entering, we found the table loaded with good things to eat. You can imagine our astonishment to see her seated at the head of the table and greeting us with that radiant smile of hers. We were speechless, words failed us entirely. She assumed an air of mock hauteur and tried to say sternly, "Gentlemen, a greeting is in order," whereupon we bowed and extended our salutations. Then she continued, "I failed utterly to convince them, but they did agree to give me an answer within the next 3 days. I know that the answer will be an attempted attack, but I did save the life of that poor creature for the time being, at least. We shall be obliged to prepare ourselves to withstand the siege. Nothing will deter them from making the attempt. I think that nearly all of us saw our fondest dreams and the results go a-glimmering, as the familiar saying has it." Our hostess read our inmost thoughts and repeated this poem. "When you come to the Red Sea place in your life, when, in spite of all you can do, there is no way round, there is no way back, there is no other way but through, then know God with a soul serene, and the dark and the storm are gone. God stills the wind. God stills the waves. God says to your soul, go on. Go on. Go on. Go on." Chapter 3. After the meal was finished, we arose from the table, our hostess leading us into the garden. To our great surprise we found Jesus, Emil, Jast and Bud Raw, seated. We joined the group and sat down. We could sense the inaudible sigh of relief and realized how much we had grown to rely upon these people. It was as though we had fastened ourselves to them with bands of steel. Somehow I saw that this we must not do. It was necessary for us to play our definite part in this great scheme of life, in order that we might not become mere puppets. We must stand wholly upon our own feet and rely wholly upon ourselves, or they would be obliged to sever the bands entirely. Our chief talked freely upon this subject later. The evening was still young and the soft glow of the fading sunset colors suffused everything with a luxuriance and beauty that one must see to appreciate it. There was not a breath of air stirring, not even a sound to disturb the tranquility that seemed to engulf us. The bandit situation that we believed had weighed so heavily upon us but a moment before, had disappeared entirely. It was calm and peaceful. There was that beautiful feeling of complete relaxation which again must be experienced to be understood. It was that beautiful feeling of complete relaxation which again must be experienced to be understood. It was as though we were in a great stream of slowly moving light. We became suddenly aware that we heard the voice of Jesus but not in words. My only explanation is that it was a pure rhythmic, flowing, vibratory influence that came to us in thought instead of words. The effect was much more pronounced than that of words. The rhythm and cadence were beyond description. Thoughts seemed to flood in and lodge. This was an entirely new experience. As these thoughts or ideas came, we translated them into stenographic characters, then transposed them into words and sentences, later submitting them to these people for approval. When I say, "Behold, a Christ of God is here," I behold the God-man standing forth. I see this body as the true temple of God, the perfect instrument or channel through which the great creative principle flows and comes forth freely. Then this creation is unadulterated in image, form, and likeness. I am God. In this attitude I send forth the master of every situation, the Christ of God triumphant. It is this ideal that I worship, and that which I worship, I bring forth. I can in no way bring forth God if I am does not present God to all humanity. In this attitude man stands forth the master of every situation, the Christ is triumphant, conquering. God and man are walking hand in hand, one. There is but one principle, one man. One of our party thought for a moment and then asked, how can we bring forth this light and make practical use of it? The answer came, let your body become a generator through which this great creative radiating principle flows. See this principle as the emanation of all power, know that it is the principle of all power, then, like an electric generator, your body will collect and magnify this energy until you send it out as a stream of pure white light that nothing can resist, and anything directed toward you cannot harm you. You can also send such intense impulses of electrical energy over these light beams that the body of the one attempting to harm you will be destroyed. Any resistance to this energy immediately magnifies its volume and therefore its velocity. The ones setting up resistance against it or attempting to set up their personal will only harm themselves. If they do not set up any resistance to this light, it will pour its healing balm through them as well as it does through you. It is the pure God beam and power, which blends with that of another at all times if there is no resistance to its free flow. It vibrates with the highest vibration. Consequently, all are vibrating in perfect harmony and accord, and no harm can possibly come to them, as they are in unison with the God vibration. There is absolutely nothing that can harm another unless that one resists the God vibration. Vibration is life. Do you not see how you stand one with God at all times? In this attitude would there be a possibility of separation? The only separation is the resistance that causes the inharmony. Nothing can come near you when you stand in the holy mount, one with God. This is not a special privilege for a few, this is for all. I am, the great absolute cause or source in which every child stands one with God. Thus all live under the law, the highest vibratory thought action. There is not an inharmonious vibration that can enter this sphere, this throne, where all belong and are at home. This is your divine kingdom. You can also use this power to return false and harmful thoughts or desires that are directed toward you. You can, if you so desire, step up this white God light beam, endow it with God power, magnify and transform the energy the sender has given the thing or condition that was intended for you, then place it into your reflector and send it back to the sender with the velocity of light. When you return it in this way, it is a beam of pure white light, instead of merely lowered vibrations, as it was sent out to you. When it reaches the sender, the impulses are so potent that it can destroy the body of the one who first put in motion the lower vibration. It matters not whether you know the sender or the location from which it came, the vibration will return to its source unerringly. The judgment or day of retribution has arrived. As you give, so you receive good measure, God measure, pressed down and running over. You can transform God power and send it out with such force that it is irresistible. These are the beams or rays of light that you see emanating from my body. These rays are emanating from your body, although they are not yet as potent, but as you go on and use this power, allied with law and principle, you will add potency to the light and can consciously direct it to accomplish any good desire. When the artist portrayed me at Gethsemane, the rays of light went out from my body instead of coming out from heaven to me. The light is the God power generated from within my body, then sent out by the reflector. These beams go out from every body when that person stands forth as God in his divine heritage, the Christ of God all one. This is and can be made the definite motto of all humanity. Can there be discord between brothers if they become this all-absorbing one? Now, step up this white beam which is the God beam upon which you send out God power, endow it with God power transformed, 10,000 or 10 million times greater than that which has been sent out to you and which you are returning, this is as you decree, then let it flow back upon the same path that the vibrations of the thing traveled to you. When the person receives this ray and accepts it as coming from God, the attempted harm is all erased, forgiven, forgotten, and no harm can come to you or the sender of that harmful thought. You are both eye to eye, one with God. Instead of inharmony, there is perfect harmony, you are again one. If the sender of the harmful thought does not accept the white ray which you have sent out in all its potency, his body will be destroyed. This pure white ray will completely erase every vibration of harm or discord if allowed to complete its perfect work. If resisted, there is nothing but a perfect erasure for the one who holds determinedly to the resistance. His resistance draws to him the whole creative principle, adversely, as to the square of the resistance set up. The square means multiplying the resistance 4 times. Thus you see that, as you send out good or evil, it will return to you fourfold. You are standing forth as the Lord or law giving forth good or God for evil, but, even in this attitude, be truly humble, judge not. Place every bit of love you possess upon this pure white ray and see well to it that it is the pure love of God that you are generating and sending forth. As you accomplish this, legions are at your command. You are still meek and humble, willing to follow on with the light. It is the pure light of God that you follow, and that light is life, love, purity and beauty, eternal and profound. There are 7 centers in your body that can be used as reflectors. You can cause these central points to glow with a radiance far greater than any artificial light, and, when you wish to send out this light, it glows with a greater potency and will reach farther than any electrical beam that can be projected. By setting all these centers aglow at the same time, you are completely surrounded by an armor that nothing can penetrate. You can send out the pure white ray of God, so energized that your body actually glows with a brilliancy far greater than that of the noonday sun. You stand forth Lord of creation, the Lord of hosts. You stand forth true and triumphant yet peaceful, loving, God enthroned in your body, and that body beautiful, spiritual, and divine. As these vibrations came to us, the light emanating from the bodies of Jesus and his group was most difficult to behold, yet there was that vibrant brilliancy shining through, which resembled liquid gold. To our vision there seemed to be an indefiniteness, while to all of the other senses there was the solidity of rock. Again the vibrations came. In this way you can make your body completely invisible to mortal sight by focusing your entire thought fully and definitely upon the pure white God ray and letting it go forth from the 7 centers as reflectors, in unison. Then, again you can step right out on either of these rays and present any picture that you wish to those that would do you harm. You can follow on this beam with the exact speed of light, and go where you will, instantly. Your body is invisible to those who do not see through and beyond the mortal. They are aware that there is something they do not understand, thus, they are susceptible to any picture you wish to present to them. That which they do not understand is mysterious or supernatural, and the faculty which is developed through suspicion or superstition is easily misled. Thus you send out love to those that would do you harm, and the energy they release reflects back to them. The picture of harm they have sent out depicts the lower man of each one fighting that which they believe to be their enemy, when in reality they are fighting the picture of their own lower selves. These pictures change the closest friends into enemies and array brother against brother. Should this band still persist in their threatened attack and raid, they will destroy each other. They now have the opportunity of leaving the district and its inhabitants unmolested, or they will turn and destroy themselves. Man cannot attempt to destroy his brother without meeting the same fate for himself. We send only the pure white ray of God love to them, and if they resist that love with hate, malice, or revenge, they, of their own free will, turn that ray into a flame that will consume them. You need have no fear. We offer only love and have no power to compel them to accept. If the bandits come with love, there will be no conflict. Our cause is already won. At this juncture a call came that there was a messenger approaching the village. We went out to meet him. He told us that the bandits had discontinued their raids and were peacefully encamped about 20 miles from the Tau Cross and had not harmed any of the inhabitants or their possessions since the appeal for help, but that they were holding the prisoners as hostages against further resistance. He also said there was a persistent rumor that the band would attack our village within the next day or two if the treasure was not delivered the following day. The messenger brought greetings from the captive people. Every man had offered his life for the protection of the village. The messenger was told that this sacrifice would not be necessary and that he could return with the thanks and deepest appreciation of the villagers for the proffered service.